Let me ask, why do smart people stay poor?
They don't do the things that makes people rich. And I think they probably convince themselves that they're smarter than they are. And so if you were smart, then you would be rich. And so then it follows that there's probably a series of traits of behavior that you don't do, either because you think you're above them or you don't know about them. So either it's a declarative knowledge deficit, meaning you don't know about the thing, which has nothing to do with the intelligence. Like if somebody eats a banana, and they're from a different country and they just eat it through the skin, it doesn't mean that they're stupid. It means they're ignorant, which is very different. That's a declarative deficit. Then there's procedural deficits, which is knowing how to. And I think one of the big difficulties with smart people is they have tremendous amounts of declarative knowledge and very little procedural knowledge. And so delineating those things has been helpful for me. And since the procedural knowledge has significantly more utility on a daily basis from a money-making perspective, like I've reduced the amount of time that I spend on declarative knowledge, and I try to get to the procedural part of it as fast as I possibly can, because I know that I'll learn significantly more by failing and doing it than, reading 100 books on sales versus doing 100 phone calls. Like you'll learn a lot more in the first 100 calls.
So how does wealth creation work?
You have to have a mechanism for letting people know about your stuff. That can happen on a variety of channels. That typically happens either one-on-one or one-to-many. And so one-on-one would be you knock on doors, you reach out to people via DM, you send emails, you send direct mail, you make phone calls, you send text messages. Any of those are one-on-one outreach. Is one way of letting people know. You could do one-to-many to people who already know who you are, which is basically today's equivalent of a billboard, which is social media. You make posts, you make content. The third way would be that you run paid advertisements. So on those same platforms, you just pay to get the exposure rather than doing it by earning it. Door four would be using those three methods to then get someone who already has the type of person that you want to advertise to and structuring some sort of deal with them. But you'd still need to reach out to them one-on-one. You'd have to make content to attract them, or you'd have to run an ad to get to that person. So these are the core things that someone must do to promote whatever they have. Because if we think about it from what must occur in order for a transaction to happen, well, people have to know that you exist or that your product exists. No one can buy something without knowing it exists. And so we have to start with promotion. The second component is that they have some sort of voluntary exchange. That means you have goods and services that are exchanged for money. And so I think the idea of like money being created really only happens with the government, but for everybody else, we exchange for it. There are people all around us. Like one of my really fun exercises is looking at whatever room you're in and knowing that everything that was there's a business behind it. So like the walls you have, there's the person who manufactured the raw materials, there's the person who sourced the materials, there's the labor that went to installing it, there's an architect who designed it, and then you look at this mic and you're like, okay, well there's this foam thing which he probably got from a third party, then there's the mechanisms inside, which is another business, there's the distributor that you bought this from. Like there's all these pieces. When people are like, man, I don't know what opportunities there are. I'm like, you can literally open your eyes and everything that you see has a business behind it. I recommend most people start with services because it requires no capital and you require time. And when you start out, you use what you have. And so if you have no money and you only have time, then you trade the time for money. Either you're going to do something that other people don't want to do that they know how to do. So like taking someone's trash out, doing lawn care, washing things, like cleaning. The second level of that is doing things that people don't want to do or know how to do. The amount that you can get paid is predicated on the value that whatever that skill deficiency is to the other person. I think about it like that. The person has to know you exist, so you have to do one of those advertising activities I referenced. And then the thing that you give them is you're going to give them some amount of time back, either the time to learn the skill or the time to do the skill. And then once that exchange is made, then both people say thank you because they didn't want to do the work and you wanted the money. Everyone wins. And then around and around we go.
Okay, so the around and around we go. Do you think about the gap as to why the vast majority of humanity will not be able to translate that into actual money?
I think a lot of people spend a lot of time on everything that isn't revenue generating. Everything that's not what we just outlined. Like if you're not reaching out to people one-on-one, you're not posting content, or you're not running ads, or getting in touch with someone who already has an audience of the people you want to reach. If you're not doing that right now, nothing else you do matters. It doesn't matter. You have to have something to sell, which, like I said, you can start with your time. And my recommendation is to go and get money from a stranger. Doesn't matter what you sell. Just get $1 from a stranger to actually walk through the process. That's the procedural knowledge. Like it's one thing, okay, oh shoot, how do I take a credit card? Oh, that's a whole nother thing. Oh, I have to get a payment process. Oh, to get a payment process, I need a bank account. Oh, to get a bank account, I need an LLC, right? So like you walked in, you're like, oh, here we go. Now I can get my first $1 across. Once you get the first $1 across, the second one comes very fast. Why don't people do the stuff that it takes to make money because they're doing everything else that doesn't make money.
There is a concept in sailing that I am beginning to think, other than intellect, which unfortunately matters, I'm beginning to think is like the thing.
Okay.
It's called velocity made good, VMG.
Okay.
Whole idea is that you can have a lot of wind, but if your sails aren't angled in the right direction, you could be moving fast, but not going in the direction that you want to go. You could be not moving at all because your sails just aren't able to capture it. Or you could actually be moving fast in the direction that you want to go. Pulling that apart as to what are the things that people don't understand. As somebody who's now scaled a business tremendously, what is it in all of those things that allows you to capture the potency of your intellect, to understand that just making content doesn't do it. The content has to be aimed in a direction. It has to have a goal in mind. How would you teach entrepreneurs how to quote unquote angle the sales?
The process that I follow is common factors analysis, basically a retroactive look back window. Now that sounds like a whole bunch of fancy words, but basically I look back at stuff I did and see what worked better than other stuff. And then I say, okay, well, the top 10%, what things did they have in common? And then the bottom 10% or the bottom half, what things did those lack compared to the top 10%? I try and do a next batch of activities, whether it's phone calls, whether it's content, whether it's product iterations, that then do more of the thing that worked. I rely on the universe for feedback, which is like, we have to try 100 repetitions of whatever the thing is, look at the top 10 or 20%, look at the common factors, and then do a whole next batch of 100 with those common factors. If performance goes up, then the variables that we isolated were the correct ones. And then within that next batch, there will be another top 10 or 20% that by variation of repetition, there will be other mutations like in DNA that occurred in that subset that I can then replicate again. And that process is how I got good at sales. It's how I started making content. But like one of my favorite scenes in The Matrix is when Neo tries to jump across both buildings and then he falls in Cypher. Everyone's like, what does it mean? And he's like, everybody falls the first time. So even the one falls the first time. I just like that as a failure as an assumption rather than something to avoid. So one of the difficulties with skill is that masters have more milestones along the way. And so they're able to mark progress with more nuance. A beginner only sees kind of a binary outcome between it worked or it didn't work. But for me, if I'm going to go into a new advertising channel, for example, if I want to say, I want to start doing cold outbound, I actually have a great story about this. My executive team, experienced people, about 3 or 4 months in, basically did like an intervention with me. And they said, you're putting all of your time and attention to this. We think this is a shiny object, using my words against me, right? This is a woman in the red dress. And we think you should stop and let's double down on what works, which for us at the time was paid ads and some content. And the thing is that they were too far away to know the progress we were making. And so they just saw that we basically hadn't made any sales. We made 1 sale in like 3 months. I knew that the first problem we had was we didn't know where to get the data from. Where do we get these lists from? So then we finally got the list and they're like, okay, but no one's picking up. We have to enrich the data. Okay, then we enrich the data. Then no one was still picking up. So then we're like, oh, well, we have to find out how to get people to pick up. So we have to do local call wrapping on our phone so that increases the pickup frequency. So then people started picking up, but then no one wanted to book a call because our script was off. So we fixed the hook and then people would listen to us, but they didn't like the offers. And we fixed the offer. Then people came to the second call, but then they weren't showing up to the second call. And then we were like, okay, we have to create a follow-up sequence. Now, at this point, they're like, hey, you need to stop. It was just, we have 100 steps that we have to take and we're 33% of the way there. But if you're a beginner, you don't know you're 33% of the way there. And so I think one of the difficult things as a beginner is that there is a leap of faith. Like when you do your first week at the gym, you're not going to get results. But it doesn't mean that working out's wrong. It just means you're measuring on the wrong time horizon. And I think one of the things that has thrown a ton of beginners off is the understanding of volatility and volume. So basically, when you have a new business or a new endeavor, what appears inconsistent or volatile is typically a function of doing too little volume. And so it's like, yeah, 1 sale comes in every, a couple weeks, I'm still, but if we look at the activities that generate that sale, you might have done 100 reach outs over 30 days, and then one of them becomes a sale. So it appears volatile, but really it's just, you got 1% and you're doing far too little. And so if we did 100 a day, then all of a sudden we might make 1 sale a day. And all of a sudden it seemed very consistent. And so the volatility is only a function of insufficient volume. I think that misconception is why many people who start out fail quickly or choose not to start, because they are measuring their feedback loop on too short of a time horizon.
All right, so if 90% of businesses fail outright,
Sure.
96% fail to break $1 million, and only 4% go over that.
Yeah.
And the ones that make it, do they share something in common? And if so, what?
Customer acquisition process. Like in the beginning, you have to do something, period. 0 to 1. You have to do something, and then you have to make your first dollar. And then your advertising is inconsistent because you're inconsistent. Once you become consistent, then your sales become inconsistent because you don't have a process. So then you have to dial in the sales process. So basically, advertising and sales have to become a consistent process with predictive metrics. We know that if we do 100 primary actions, whether that's 100 posts, $100 in ad spend, 100 reach outs, that will generate this many leads, which generates this many calls, which generates this many sales. And it could be on e-commerce, or it could be in a service or environment like I'm describing with calls. But fundamentally, you just have to get to that equation. And once you get there, then it's just inputs and outputs. And then you're just pouring as much in and then figuring out what the constraints are from you putting more in.